of Power, live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Tyler Kendall, I'm Caitlin Lyons.
Tonight, ramping up the pressure on Fed Chair Jerome Powell. The president today intensifying his call for the central bank to cut interest rates amid mounting criticism about the Fed's recent renovations. What could happen next when Deputy Treasury Secretary Michael Faulkender joins us up ahead.
Plus, he'll also talk about the crypto bill celebration at the White House.
The entire crypto community, for years, you were mocked and dismissed and counted out. You were counted out as little as a year and a half ago. But this signing is a massive validation.
The president signing the Genius Act into law, the first major piece of legislation governing the growing stablecoin market. We'll discuss that new law, plus the $9 billion rescissions package also sent to the president's desk today when we speak with Democratic Congressman and Financial Services Committee member Brad Sherman.
And an issue dividing the president's own supporters, Jeffrey Epstein.
The Democrats had control of this building, the White House, for 4 years, and they didn't do a dang thing when it came to transparency in regards to Jeffrey Epstein and his heinous crimes.
The recent move by the president regarding grand jury testimony as D.C. becomes focused on the story amid a deepening Republican divide and the threats he's now issuing to the Wall Street Journal following a report that potentially ties him to the disgraced financier. But we begin tonight with the tensions between the president and the Federal Reserve Chair, Jerome Powell. The administration escalating its push for rate cuts and getting some support from within the FOMC. Federal Reserve Governor Chris Waller told Bloomberg Surveillance this morning he'd push for a cut as early as this month.
I never want to commit to an action before the meeting. Otherwise, if everybody committed before, you don't even need to have the meeting to have a discussion. So the goal is to always go to the meeting, sit down, listen to all sides. People will try to convince me of their view. I'll try to convince them of my views. And in the end of the day, you make a decision on what you think is the right outcome and the right data, how the data is coming in. And right now, I laid out my case last night. I don't think I could be any more clear, I hope, as to what my position is and why I think we need to do this.
Joining us now for more is Bloomberg's Michael McKee, who was part of that interview that you just heard. Mike, should we expect anyone else to join Governor Waller come meeting time?
Well, there's a very good chance that Vice Chair Bowman will join. Mickey Bowman has suggested that she, too, thinks that there's a reason to cut rates in July. She's ready to do that. Of course, she and Waller were the two governors on the Federal Reserve Board who were appointed by Donald Trump. Now, the question is, does Chris Waller follow through with what he's talking about in terms of really thinking we need to have a rate cut in July, and dissent if the rest of the board, the majority of the Open Market Committee, votes the other way to hold rates? That'll be a key test for him, I think, and maybe make it a little difficult for him to decide what to do if he's still hoping to be Fed chair.
Well, Mike, we've obviously gotten a lot of economic data this week, including cooler than expected, at least on the surface level, inflation data, robust retail sales data, and today, University of Michigan sentiment data that indicates inflation expectations are also beginning to recede. Does all of that together not paint the picture of a Fed that may see figures that suggest a rate cut could be coming soon?
Well, there's two things you have to consider. One is that we are now a few hours away from the beginning of the blackout period. They can't talk again until after they have their meeting on July 30th. And they've basically gone into the meeting saying there's not going to be a rate cut. So they don't want to surprise or shock the markets, and so it's unlikely that they would vote for a cut. There's also no emergency to cut rates because the economy is doing very well, and we're still seeing retail sales, as you suggested, showing consumers are still hanging in there. So the issue is that the Fed is going to still want more time because, of course, Donald Trump keeps postponing the effective date of lots more tariffs than we have seen so far. And there have been signs in the CPI and the PPI that there are underlying inflation pressures coming through in tariffed areas. So the majority of the Fed is going to want to wait, I think, and see for a couple more months. If you get to the September 17th meeting, you've got two more CPI reports after this one.
All right, Bloomberg's Mike McKee in Idaho for us. Thank you so much. Now, beyond the fight over the Fed's policy and the Fed's chairman, today, a victory celebration at the White House as Republican lawmakers and crypto industry leaders gathered around the president for the signing of the Genius Act just a short time ago.
The Genius Act creates a clear and simple regulatory framework to establish and unleash the immense promise of dollar-backed stable coins. This could be perhaps the greatest revolution in financial technology since the birth of the Internet itself.
Joining us now on set with us in our D.C. studio for more, one of the individuals who was there for the signing actually got a shout out from the president, Deputy Treasury Secretary Michael Faulkender. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio, Mr. Deputy Secretary. As we consider this argument that we heard the president alluding to here, that this will be good for the dollar, it will also, the saying is right now, spur demand for U.S. Treasuries. How big are you anticipating the stablecoin market will get, and how does that translate to Treasury demand?
Yeah, thanks again for having me. You know, it's an enormous victory today, and it really sets the stage for us to demonstrate our leadership when it comes to financial innovation. Because what this bill does is it says if we modernize the payment system globally, we now have a digital asset that has rules of the road established by Congress for what backs those digital assets. It provides enormous amounts of confidence to not only Americans, but our trading partners around the world who are then willing to make exchanges to invoice in dollars and then be paid via stablecoins because they know that it is an asset that has value behind it. Because what is it that backs it? Primarily, it's going to be T-bills. And so if indeed it's the case that this expands even further the portion of international trade that is invoiced in dollars and then allows for nearly immediate payment. So, you know, think about it right now. When a lot of these payments are made, if you wire money abroad, you know, it can be 24, 48 hours between when that's initiated versus when the money is received. If it's done on a blockchain, on a distributed ledger blockchain, it could be minutes, if not seconds. And so it's going to enormously hasten the time frame for making payments. It's more secure. It's more private. It's significantly cheaper. And so if indeed this does revolutionize the way that international payments are invoiced and paid, then there should be a flocking to this technology. And if all of that trade, therefore, is even further denominated in stablecoins, then there's going to be demand for the underlying assets, which are Treasury securities. And we could potentially see on the order of trillions of additional demand.
So if there is this trillions in additional demand and you have stablecoins backed by Treasuries and there's a mass redemption event, doesn't this create some sort of financial stability risk?
I would say the exact opposite, because, you know, you look at treasuries, as treasury bills in particular, as being the most liquid market, the most liquid asset in the world. And so, you know, even when we've had times of stress, we know how to make sure that the Treasury market operates. So that's one thing. The second thing is, because of this legislation providing the full understanding of how these things work, providing, you know, legislative structure to them, if anything, it should reduce any kind of run risk against this asset. So we actually think that this creates a more stable environment for payments and should mitigate any concern about there being a run on the dollar or on treasuries.
On concerns around the crypto markets and specifically President Trump's ties to them, I don't have to tell you that ethics concerns have been raised for the ties that both he and his family have via World Liberty Financial or their own meme coins, et cetera, to this market. How should Americans think about the degree of confidence they should have that regulators in this administration and Republicans within the president's party are making the best choices to make sure this is secure for them financially and not just that it provides some financial benefit to the president's interests?
So, number one, I would point to the fact that this legislation in both the House and the Senate got a massive bipartisan majority. So any notion that the Democrats would sign on to a bill that is somehow going to make it, you know, easier for the president to generate wealth for himself, I think is belied by the fact that we got such strong Democratic support. In fact, what it does is it recognizes that by putting in statute a framework whereby people can, with confidence, engage in international commerce and know that they are receiving a digital asset that's backed by underlying securities that there is faith behind, that you have, you know, the full faith and credit of the federal government behind. If anything, that should bring enormous confidence to the American people that they should indeed consider moving some of their commerce onto a stablecoin-backed platform by which they make payment.
We also want to ask you about another top story here, of course, which is the Federal Reserve. And we'll get into the implications for Chair Powell. But you heard Chris Waller. They were saying that he could dissent if the FOMC does end up holding rates steady in July. Can you give us your perspective on the difference between cutting in July or waiting until September in terms of the economic outcomes?
Sure. So, I have to tell you, I was sitting there listening to your reporter's report and Kaylee asking the question, you took away my talking points on it because you listed off all of the economic news that has come out. If you look at the CPI number that came out this week, the PPI number was flat. We've got strong retail sales. We've got growing consumer confidence. We got we're in the process of implementing the tax bill, which is going to be expansionary on the supply side. We're engaged in a massive deregulatory effort. All of those things combined should reduce pressure on prices, reduce inflationary pressures, and yet we're not seeing the Fed, reevaluate with any kind of haste whether or not they come in and start lowering interest rates. And again, obviously that is ultimately the decision for the Federal Reserve to engage in. But as you compare our economic environment to our partners and allies around the world, our economy is performing well. We're not seeing inflation, and yet our interest rates are significantly higher than what you're seeing among our peers. And so, as we have said before, I think there is a case to be made for the Federal Reserve to get off of this wait-and-see approach and instead act on the data that they say drives their decisions.
But even if they were to pursue a cut, they may be able to impact rates at the short end of the curve, but not necessarily at the long end. If there's a credibility question that's being raised as to whether or not the Fed is going to be able to maintain a focus on inflation under political pressure to cut rates, if they actually cut rates, do we not have a problem potentially where you could see long end rates actually moving up, potentially having the adverse effect that the president wants to achieve, which is lower mortgage rates, for example?
So You're right that ultimately the objective is to also get long-term rates down. But the reason that long-term rates went up so much is because the Fed waited so long to raise interest rates 4 years ago when inflation was apparent, because you had fiscal policy that was stimulating demand and constraining supply. We have the exact opposite going on here. Right? What we have going on is we are expanding supply such that you can better fulfill the needs of the American people by bringing more products and services into the marketplace. So as we continue to implement our deregulatory agenda, as we finalize the rules on tax reform, as we address these international negotiations that are going to provide certainty and clarity on tariff rates that are going to be imposed, all of those things should provide confidence and increase the amount of supply that's coming into the economy, and that should be disinflationary. And so ultimately, once markets recognize that the great economic data we're already seeing is part of the beginning of a trend, I would hope that markets see that it merits both shorter and long-term rates coming down.
I'm glad that you brought up tariffs, because we do want to ask you about some of the timelines here. We're still waiting for sector-specific tariffs. We know that those Section 232 investigations have been launched when it comes to chips and pharmaceuticals. Should we expect these tariffs to align with that August 1st deadline?
So I don't want to get out in front of the Commerce Department and the U.S. Trade Representative who's leading on those evaluations. But I can tell you, and the president made remarks at the Genius Act signing today about still more deals being imminent.
Might you be able to share which ones those would be?
I was sitting right next to Commerce Secretary Letnick, and you could tell that they were very eager to make an announcement. But you know that I'm not going to get in front of my boss when it comes to making an announcement that hasn't yet been made by the White House. But you could tell that there is some news coming shortly.
All right. We'll leave it there. Michael Faulkender, the Deputy Treasury Secretary, we thank you so much for joining Bloomberg. And coming up, more on the developments surrounding the president's ongoing pressure against the Fed Chair Jerome Powell. But up next, how Jeffrey Epstein's case is now fracturing the president's own supporters and the suit he just filed against the Wall Street Journal's parent company. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Welcome back to Balance of Power alongside Kaylee Lyons. I'm Tyler Kendall. As we come to air tonight, news from the president's legal team as they sued the Wall Street Journal's corporate parent, Dow Jones, for libel, following its newest report tying him to Jeffrey Epstein. The issue is now dividing Republicans as marquee names within the MAGA movement call for the disclosure of the files related to the case. Meanwhile, images like these are popping up throughout London ahead of the president's visit there later this month. They show a younger Donald Trump alongside Epstein. This comes after the aforementioned Wall Street Journal report alleged he was once sent a suggested birthday letter to Epstein. The president said the letter was fake in a social media post, calling the story false, malicious, and defamatory. The paper declined to comment on the president's litigation threat.
Last night on True Social, the president posted, quote, based on the ridiculous amount of publicity given to Jeffrey Epstein, I have asked Attorney General Pam Bondi to produce any and all pertinent grand jury testimony subject to court approval. Moments later, the Attorney General responded, President Trump, we are ready to move the court tomorrow to unseal the grand jury transcripts. And here with the latest now is Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson. So, Wendy, it's important to consider here that there's no guarantee the court will agree to do this. It's not clear how much information this might entail. And third, I guess the president making good now on his threat, not just to sue Dow Jones, but News Corp and Rupert Murdoch himself. Right,
who has become sort of a frenemy over the years, as the Wall Street Journal, covers his administration. But on the effort to unseal these grand jury testimony, it is a fig leaf, and it is very uncertain that a court will allow grand jury testimony to be released. And in this one case, the president is being very deferential to courts. Instead of saying they're radical judges and they're, breaking the law and they shouldn't get in my way, this time it's like, well, it's up to the courts. So if they don't release them, then sorry, guys, we can't release the files. And so it gives him cover to say that at least he tried to get those files released in response to MAGA world's desire to see them.
Well, let's talk about the narrative that we're starting to see emerge here, right? Because this actually was a pretty big legislative win this week for the White House. We had the rescissions package. We have them signing the Genius Act. How are we seeing the White House try to play defense on this issue when it really is coming to top of mind, when there's a whole bunch of other things that the administration would probably like to shine a light on?
Absolutely, Tyler. And this is one of the things that the president is so good at, is misdirection and redirection. So he not only had the legislative wins this week, but the Epstein case is floating out there. Then there was this sort of first into public indication of his advanced age with the diagnosis of this vein thing, which isn't serious, but certainly suggested he was an old man, as he is. And so what does he do? He has now directed the intelligence community to investigate the Russia hoax again, to investigate the Obama administration's involvement in the Russia-Trump story, which was from almost 10 years ago. And then, of course, it's the effort to bring those grand jury testimony back out, and he made a big deal signing the crypto bill today. And so, he is really trying to seize back the narrative. I will add that what's helping him turn the focus away from Epstein is also Democrats jumping in, right? They are jumping in, and that gives him another target. Besides the media, it will be Democrats who are now the ones who really want the Epstein files released, not his own supporters.
All right, a story that is engulfing Washington, truly. Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson, we thank you so much. Now, yesterday, before the Wall Street Journal published their story, the White House press secretary Caroline Leavitt said this about what President Trump is calling the, quote, Jeffrey Epstein hoax.
Can you clarify which part of the Epstein hoax is the hoax part?
The president is referring to the fact that Democrats have now seized on this as if they ever wanted transparency when it comes to Jeffrey Epstein, which is an asinine suggestion for any Democrat to make. The Democrats had control of this building, the White House, for 4 years, and they didn't do a dang thing when it came to transparency in regards to Jeffrey Epstein and his heinous crimes.
For more now, let's bring in our political panel. Joining us tonight is Bloomberg Politics contributor Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital and Republican strategist, alongside Archie Siddiqui, former senior aide to former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and the founder and CEO of Bellwether Government Affairs. Rick, I want to start with you because it is unclear if the federal court would grant the administration's request to actually make the public grand jury deliberations public. This is typically something that's kept secret. How could this perhaps complicate the administration's defense on the issue?
Oh, I think it was all thought out in advance. The last thing Donald Trump wants is a release of these documents. So why not pick the hardest place to possibly get a document released from? A grand jury. And you notice he even set it up as a failure. He said, look, I'm only doing this because of the publicity, the negative publicity that I'm getting. So please, court, don't release it. I mean, like the messaging is pretty obvious that the president wants this all to go away. He's not looking for more transparency. He thought he had, sort of slipped the trap, earlier in the month, and it's just come back to haunt him. And the press secretary is right. I mean, Democrats are making hay with this, but so are the Republicans. And that's the only reason Donald Trump cares, is because his own base is now turned against him on this.
Well, and to that point, Archie, do Democrats risk overplaying their hand here as the president's now suggesting, hey, what were you doing for the last 4 years if this is such a big deal?
Well, I think this was a bipartisan moment. If you look at yesterday on the floor, the crypto vote got totally derailed over this issue because of Republicans. And then there is also this whole effort by Congressman Massey to really address this issue. So I think this is a bipartisan effort, and it's about transparency and accountability. And honestly, the Democrats don't know what's included. I think if whatever are in these files, I think it's going to cut a lot of different ways for a lot of powerful people. So I don't think this is political.
Well, to build off of this idea that there is momentum in Congress, you mentioned Thomas Massey. He's paired up with Ro Khanna. That could force this vote to release a more fuller extent of the files. Rick, does this give it even more staying power when it comes to the narrative?
Sure. I mean, you want to make the funnel smaller, not bigger, when you're dealing with a crisis like this. And this is a crisis. The White House is bunkered in on this. As you mentioned, I mean, it is slowing down the things that they care about. The crypto bill, it's amazing that they were able to get their rescissions package done without a big, brouhaha in the Senate. His former vice president even came out and sort of weighed in on this. So, they want to talk less about this. And every time someone says, oh, well, we want to know what happened, it's a bad day in the Oval Office. And so one thing they could do is actually quit talking about it from the White House. I mean, Donald Trump talks about this incessantly all day. Every meeting that he has, he brings up, I can't believe everyone's talking about the Epstein thing, except that you just did. That's how rumors get started in Washington. And the fact that you can start them from the Oval Office, you've got to shut it down. He's got to quit talking about it. The rest of the administration's got to quit talking about it. The FBI and the Justice Department need to quit talking about it. And there should be one person appointed in the administration who says, I'm the only one who will address this issue.
Well, I wonder how hard it is to address for one person in particular, and that is Vice President J.D. Vance, who in theory would be taking the MAGA movement forward after the time of Donald Trump is over. Archie, does this actually create the biggest problem of all for him specifically?
I think it creates a problem for him because we all know that Donald Trump was on the opposite side of this way back when. So he has to defend for that. And then he also has to think about his future, where he has made some very interesting comments in the past about the importance of transparency here. So I think that's absolutely right. I think it's a difficult situation.
And do we buy that the MAGA movement is going to be fundamentally fractured by this, or does a fake news story bring them back together?
Listen, I don't think this is going away, particularly as we're going into the August recess. I think the center of gravity is going to be with Congress and where they proceed. Because not only do they have this Massey effort with Ro Khanna, but they also have broad subpoena authority. So the question is, does Congress do something here? And is this a moment where they come together and press the administration? Now, we haven't seen anything to that effect where they have been aggressive with the administration, but we'll see.
Yeah, and I did say fake news in quotation marks that you couldn't see when I said it. Rick Davis and Archie Siddiqui, we'll check in with both of you again later on this hour. But up next, that $9 billion in Doge cuts that are now officially on the books. We'll have more with Congressman Brad Sherman next on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Kaylee Lines alongside Tyler Kendall. We've got some big stories playing out across the country today, so it's time now for tonight's Power Brief. Last night, just 2 weeks after the devastating July 4th floods, Texas Governor Greg Abbott informed the public that the death toll in Hill Country has climbed to up to at least 135 people, with that search and recovery program still ongoing. Abbott called the floods the most significant in the state's history, noting that casualties now eclipse the number of people killed during Hurricane Harvey in 2017. This is new polling from The Economist and YouGov shows 52% of respondents believe the majority of these deaths could have been prevented had the government been more prepared.
Plus, the Trump administration's promise of easier M&A reviews may help improve the prospects for the largest ever deal among U.S. railroads. Union Pacific is in early discussions to acquire Norfolk Southern, according to people familiar with the matter, creating a transcontinental railroad. Any deal would still face U.S. scrutiny, of course, but it's notable because this kind of takeover has been speculated about since the 1990s and has never gone anywhere because it was seen as dead on arrival. Norfolk Southern is up more than 6% in the past 2 days, the biggest two-day gain since May.
And Secretary of Treasury Scott Bessent is in Japan, talking trade with the country's prime minister as active discussions continue. Both sides remained optimistic an agreement can be reached before the August 1st deadline, when tariffs on goods imported from Japan will jump to 25%. After the meeting, Bessent wrote, quote, "A good deal is more important than a rush deal, and a mutually beneficial trade agreement between the United States and Japan remains within the realm of possibility." Bessent is in Japan to attend U.S. National Day at the World Expo, which takes place in Osaka tomorrow.
And earlier this afternoon, President Trump, of course, signed the first piece of legislation that will regulate the booming stablecoin industry. Here's part of what he had to say before signing the bill at the White House.
This afternoon, we take a giant step to cement the American dominance of global finance and crypto technology as we sign the landmark Genius Act into law.
While the bill did receive broad bipartisan support, many lawmakers raised concern over the law that it didn't go far enough. And joining us now is one of those members of the House of Representatives that voted no to this bill yesterday, Democratic Congressman Brad Sherman of California, a member of the House Financial Services Committee. Congressman, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. Proponents of this legislation say that it actually makes the stablecoin market safer. It requires that a stablecoin is backed dollar for dollar by high-quality assets. Why do you not see that it works that way?
Well, what you have is a system designed to be a payment system for those who want cryptocurrency, that is to say, hidden money. We already have money market funds. They're well regulated. They have assets behind them, and they pay about a 4% return. This Genius Act creates a new money market fund. They call it a stablecoin. And under the law, it can pay 0% interest. That's all it can pay is 0% interest. So why would any genius invest in that? And the answer is the one advantage it has. It's right there in the name cryptocurrency, which means hidden money. And that is these stable coins are exempt from the Know Your Customer anti-money laundering provisions. So look, anybody engaged in honest business who's paying their taxes will want to get that 4% rate of return available from any of the money market funds that are out there. But if you're engaged in crime, tax evasion, or you're hiding assets from your former spouse, you give up that 4%. And this is a system designed to provide those folks with an efficient payment system. I don't think drug dealers deserve an efficient payment and monetary system.
But, Congressman, the administration clearly made the case to many of your colleagues on both the Genius Act, but also the Clarity Act. 78 Democrats ended up voting for that bill. Are you disappointed with your colleagues that ended up getting on board with this?
Well, you got to remember, most of my colleagues haven't spent near as much time as I have studying this issue. But they're all aware that this is the biggest corrupting industry ever in the history of politics. You know, people are aware of these super PACs for big oil or big pharma. You can take all of big oil, all of big pharma, put them together, multiply by 5, and you still don't have the amount of money that the super PACs for crypto put in last year. So all of my colleagues are experts in politics. That's why they're here. Most of them are not, have really not spent a lot of time wondering how the payment system and the currency system affects our country. And so it's not surprising that crypto was able to get a lot of votes. I mean, the amount of money we're talking here, I mean, people think about money in politics all the time, but this amount of money is absolutely unprecedented, and there's no pressure on the other side. On so many of the issues we face in Congress, there's a pack on this side and a pack on that side, and they're both pushing. There is no hack or lobbyist pushing for effective income tax law enforcement, pushing for effective crackdowns on drug kingpins, or trying to enforce our sanctions laws. All of these things are undermined by what happened yesterday, and there's no lobbyist informing people of the damage that this will do.
Well, Congressman, I know you're speaking specifically about your colleagues in the House of Representatives, but I also wonder if you've had any conversations with Democrats in the Senate, which, of course, will receive the Clarity Act specifically next. Are you expecting that kind of bipartisan support will materialize in the other chamber?
There's a lot of money from the super PACs of the crypto industry, absolutely unprecedented, beyond anything anyone in Washington has ever imagined. And I think that we may get some improvement in the Clarity Act, but I'm not predicting that we're going to be able to defeat it. And keep in mind that the proponents of these things say that they're all for innovation and efficient payment systems. The third bill that we passed yesterday as part of this package prohibits even the study of a central bank digital currency. So when it comes to the dollar, their position is it must only be George Washington level technology, even though the Constitution says the federal government is supposed to create currency. They say yes, but only with 1776 technology. But the competitor to the dollar, the stablecoin and the cryptocurrency, can use 21st century technology. That means that the proponents of these bills aren't for innovation. They're not for free choice. They're only for innovation and free choice when you're forced to choose to make the crypto bros a lot more money. And that, of course, includes Donald Trump.
Congressman, you're on House Financial Services, which, of course, has partial oversight when it comes to the Federal Reserve. And we want to get your opinion here when it comes to the future of the Fed chair. But first, I'm just wondering what you make of the administration's argument for lower rate cuts, as they do point to recent economic data.
Every administration wants somewhat lower interest rates. I think that Trump may be making a political mistake, although I don't think that he will get the lower interest rates for political reasons. We may see lower interest rates, but they'll be based on data. And that's because those who argue that we shouldn't lower interest rates claim that it would increase inflation. And I think Trump will be judged next year based on the price of everything we buy. I think what he's doing is he won't get the lower interest rates that he keeps demanding, and then he'll turn to the American people next year and say, well, the economy sucks, but it's not my fault. The fact is that he will replace Powell for a reason that you may not be able to focus on or haven't focused on yet, and that is under these bills, there can be a bailout of crypto companies only by the Fed. And Jay Powell has made it clear he's not going to bail out crypto, but you can be sure the next guy will.
Well, when we consider the next guy, Congressman, we understand on that short list could include the likes of the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, the National Economic Council Director, Kevin Hassett. Would either of those be credible choices to you, given they already serve in this administration and are close to the president?
Well, first, they have stood by and watched the president put pressure on the Fed and cross the line, and they haven't said anything about it. An independent central bank is critical to every important country. And what we've seen in Turkey and some other places where the government pressures the central bank is that it may achieve short-term political advantage for whichever political party, but it's terrible for their economy. The second thing, and I hope they get quizzed on this, is whether they would use Section 13.3 of the Federal Reserve Act to bail out crypto companies. And my guess is that Trump won't appoint anybody where he doesn't think the answer is yes. But I'm not sure they'll go on the record and say that that's what they're willing to do.
Congressman, I want to ask you about something else that made headlines this week, which is, of course, the passage of the rescissions package, because it's our understanding that this is actually going to be the first of perhaps a few coming from the administration. Now, Congress, of course, controls the appropriations process. In your view, Is Congress giving up the power of the purse here, or is this how governing goes when Republicans control both chambers? And perhaps it could be the other way around if the majorities were flipped.
Well, first, you've got to look at the substance. Some 3.3 million people are going to die as a result of the cuts in American foreign aid, particularly food and medicine. And the richest man in the world, Elon Musk, used many months of his time to take food and medicine away from the poorest people in the world. As to the methodology, Republicans are not in complete control here in Washington because some things require 60 votes in the Senate. But the rescissions process allows them to do this with only 50 votes in the Senate. And that is why both NPR, PBS, and our foreign aid program were gutted yesterday. What we have to do, and I think we may be headed for a government shutdown, because I think Democrats will insist that if we're going to pass new spending bills by September 30th, they can't be subject to this rescission, because they need 7 Democrats to vote to fund the government by September 30th, or the government shuts down. So they'll get those 7 by saying, here's the package, and then they'll use rescission to take away those elements of the package that Democrats find most important. So whatever bill we vote on in September that needs 60 votes in the Senate to pass the bill, we've got to provide that it takes 60 votes in the Senate to change the bill afterwards. Otherwise, we will be fooled.
Well, your point is understood that Republicans don't completely control Washington, but they do for now, Congressman, of course, have control of the House of Representatives. And President Trump is suggesting, to make sure it stays that way post-midterms in 2026, that Texas should do some redistricting. And this is actually going to be something that is explored in a special legislative session in that state beginning on Monday. This is what the president said about that earlier this week.
5, I think we get 5. And there could be some other states. We're going to get another 3 or 4 or 5 in addition. Texas would be the biggest one, and that'll be 5. Just a very simple redrawing. We pick up 5 seats. But we have a couple of other states where we'll pick up seats also.
And Congressman, in response, your governor in California, Gavin Newsom, takes to X and says Trump says he's going to steal 5 congressional seats in Texas and gerrymander his way into a 2026 win. Well, 2 can play that game. Special sessions, special elections, ballot initiatives, new laws. It's all on the table when democracy is on the line. The governor is suggesting California do some redistricting of its own. Congressman, would you support that effort?
I don't think either side should be playing games. I think gerrymandering is something voters hate, and it certainly isn't democracy. That being said, if one side is playing games and the other side isn't, that can be even worse. So if we're going to have gerrymandering in Texas, which we shouldn't, then we may need it in California as well. For a long time, I've supported legislation to have independent commissions do the redistricting without partisanship in all 50 states. And that would be the real solution. But in the absence of that, we can't sit by and watch the president say, this has nothing to do with fair redistricting or legitimate democracy. We're going to contort things in Texas in order to get the outcome we want. And certainly those who supported democracy in our country should not be enamored of Donald Trump.
All right, Democratic Congressman Brad Sherman of California, thank you so much for joining us. And coming up, we'll have more on the legislative wins notched by President Trump this week when we bring back our political panel. Up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Kaylee Lyons alongside Tyler Kendall in Washington. And we turn back now to our political panel. Bloomberg politics contributor Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital and Republican strategist, alongside Archie Siddiqui, former senior aide to former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and the founder and CEO of Bellwether Government Affairs. So I want to take stock of where we are on this Friday, because this was actually a pretty massive legislative week in Congress. Beyond just the one big beautiful bill passing earlier this month, we had multiple crypto bills that had action taken on them, and a rescissions package that had to pass by today has passed indeed. And President Trump, of course, signed one of those bills into law. Archie, does this just further underscore his command of the Republican Party? Because it wasn't without difficulty, and yet at the end of the day, it still got done.
Yeah, I mean, I think it certainly does. I think he has had a big month, no doubt. I do think that there were some distractions on crypto. As you know, there's been a bipartisan group of members who have been working on this for a long time. So, but certainly, actually, one of the I guess, roadblocks on that for Democrats was some of the unjust enrichment or conflicts of interest on this bill with the Trump family. So that certainly created some speed bumps, but I think we got to a place where Democrats wanted that bipartisan moment. But on rescissions, I think the rescissions piece was the game changer this week because I think it set the tone for a pretty contentious fall.
Well, let's build off of that, Rick. This is supposed to be probably the first in a series if we listen to the OMB director, Russ Vought. What else could we see down the line, and how is this going to put Republicans in a position? Because we did see some come out against this.
Yeah, we first got into this with Doge, remember. They started saying, oh, we're not going to spend this money. Well, that's actually not how it works, and so you have to rescind the money they identified to not spend. And so they have a pile of about $150 billion worth of those things, and this was the first shot to say, by the OMB director, if we can pass this very innocuous bill that basically has things that Republicans dislike in it, maybe we can give you more of that $150 billion. So there's a pipeline of this stuff. And it was actually pretty honest by the White House. They weren't sure they could pass this. I mean, it's been a while since Bill Clinton, since the rescission package has actually been passed by Congress. So it was a bit of an experiment. Experiment worked. And they jammed it through the United States Senate during a time, and I think this is what's particularly interesting about this, when they're all sitting down meeting to go over the appropriations process, which is the normal process of allocating money for the federal budget. And you need Democratic support for that. So on one hand, you've got the administration saying, we're going to rip this out of your hands, this authority, and give it back to the White House because we can get 51 votes to do that. But then we need the Democrats by the end of September, 30th of September, to pass an appropriations bill, 12 of them between now and then, in order to be able to fund the government. And so I think that's where you have a lot of people scratching their head today as they leave to go home saying, there's no chance that's going to happen. We'll be passing a CR to fund the government again.
Well, when we consider, though, that a CR will still need Democratic votes, Archie, we've seen this before where Chuck Schumer decided actually to keep the government open instead of doing what many in the party, the Democratic Party specifically, might have wanted. Do you expect him to hold a firmer line this time around?
I think there's going to be a lot of discussion in the Democratic caucus because I think that was the marker that was set this week, is that if Republicans cannot honor a deal on appropriations, then why should the Democrats engage? So I think that's the challenge going forward for Democrats and Republicans, and really a bipartisan appropriations process that is tried and true, that there's been a big deviation. Because as you rightly pointed out, Democrats started off and Republicans started off the week all worried about rescissions. And then Donald Trump came in and told the Republicans he needed them to pass the bill. And then the Senate started to move.
Well, another bill, of course, that has dominated Washington was the One Big Beautiful Bill. And we're starting to get some polling and reaction to how it's resonating with Americans. And there was a new poll out today from the Associated Press, which found that about 2/3 of U.S. adults expect the new tax law will help the rich. About half say it will do more harm than good for middle-class people like them, according to their survey. Now, our own reporting indicates that the White House actually knew that this bill wasn't going to be popular, and that's part of why we're starting to see many administration officials go out and sell the bill. But, Rick, when we do look at the components inside of it, why isn't the messaging resonating with Americans?
Well, one, I don't think there's been time to actually sell the bill. So, remember, for the months that we've been going through this reconciliation bill, it's been hard enough selling it to other Republicans, right? I mean, that has been the contest. Can this administration convince enough Republicans in the House and the Senate to be willing to do this? And it squeaked by. They barely were able to accomplish that. And so now that bill, which is now being seen by every American as being punitive to them, right? What are they going to get for this? And more like, what are they going to lose? Has been in the press, very, very frequently. And yet the administration hasn't been able to get out and really talk about it, including this president that dominates the news media when he goes out there and talks about whatever he wants to talk about. And you'll notice, like today, no message from the President of the United States on that reconciliation bill, something that will have the most impact likely on his party's chances to win, to stay in power in the midterm elections.
Well, the midterm elections, of course, aren't until 2026. An election that's going to happen more immediately, Archie, is the New York City mayoral election. And I do want to ask you about that, as we had the Democratic House leader, who, of course, has taken over for Nancy Pelosi, who used to work for Hakeem Jeffries, meeting with Zohran Mamdani today, who's the Democratic nominee. Not, however, giving Mamdani an endorsement, at least immediately after that meeting. Do you expect it will come, or is he going to continue to hold back on that?
I mean, I think Hakeem Jeffries has one job, is to focus on the midterm elections. So certainly the New York politics are important. He needs to represent his district, but I think that is very much his focus. So I think there's been a disproportionate focus on this mayoral race because it's one of the early ones. But I think when you look at Jeffries, he is.
But is it not telling? This is a progressive we're talking about. Yes. President Trump paints him as a communist. Does it not reflect some kind of fissure in the Democratic Party, and Democrats may be looking to a leader like Jeffries for a signal as to whether they should follow?
No, we're a big tent party. So I think but certainly I wouldn't say that Mamdani and Jeffries have similar politics. I mean, clearly Mamdani is on the very left of our spectrum. So I think this is a local race. It injected a lot of enthusiasm. But I think the really important piece of the Mamdani race is you look at what Donald Trump did. He had two issues that really I think he did a really good job of focusing on. It was cost of living and immigration. And you look at Mamdani, really his rise was cost of living in New York City. So I think that's the common ground between Jeffries and Mamdani, but you can get there different ways. And I think you're going to see House Democrats laser focused on addressing some of those issues.
Well, Rick, just in our final minute here, your thoughts on this, and I would love to get your thoughts on the political calculus. If we are looking at razor-thin margins in Congress, does this race play perhaps a bigger role, or are you in the same camp? Perhaps this is just more about the local New York politics.
Yeah, this is really a Democratic issue in a Democratic city in a Democratic state. So, but it's fun to talk about it as a Republican. And I must say, I'm not surprised by the minority leader's reaction, because there are other Democrats running against him, much more like Hakeem Jeffries, right? I mean, Adams is more like Hakeem Jeffries. Cuomo is more like Hakeem Jeffries. I mean, this is the far left of the Democratic Party. And the last thing the Democrats want to do is start to position themselves on the far left as they work into a midterm election. And so I can imagine it's very difficult for Hakeem Jeffries to break bread with the nominee of their party for mayor.
And yet still he took the meeting.
And still he took the meeting, yes, because it is dominating our national conversation here. All right, our political panel tonight, Rick Davis and Archie Siddiqui, we thank you so much. And for more on all of these stories, make sure to check out the Washington Edition newsletter that's on the terminal and online. Of course, we're going to be tracking a lot of developments throughout this weekend, including that President Trump is set to meet with some GOP senators tonight, Kaylee.
Indeed. He also suggested that they're on the verge of announcing some new trade deals or new trade letters. He suggested that could come as soon as today, but we're probably going to have to be on watch for that all weekend. So rest up if you can, but keep your eye on the wire, as we will do here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.